Do you ever buy thrift store items, bring them home, and then not know what to do with them? Well, in today's video, I'll be tackling a box full of these forgotten thrift finds and transforming them into unique home decor. And I'll be sharing 10 upcycling tips to help you breathe new life into your thrift store leftovers. So let's get started.
For the first upcycling project, I want to use this leftover thrifted wood heart. I'm pretty sure this was handmade. The inside has 3 holes, probably made with a hole or spade drill bit, but it's a little odd, so I'm going to turn it into wall decor. To dress up the top of the heart, I applied a floral rub-on transfer from IOD's Lover of Flowers set. Due to the varnish on the wood, the transfer applied perfectly. And since I applied the flower on one side of the heart, I decided to apply the flower name, Poppy, to the other side. And yes, I'm using a bird's nest and bird this week because the hole in the heart is the perfect spot. I hot glued it in place and added some moss. Then I found a small brown bird, also an old thrift store find, that fit perfectly in the nest. He was a little scratched up, so I used some brown paint to freshen him up. I used some of these daisies in last week's video, but I still have a lot left, and I wanted to add some greenery around the nest. So I cut off a few of the leaves and glued them behind the nest. Then I hot glued the lid in place to keep it in a partially open position. This orange flower came out of the wire urn in last week's video, and I thought it coordinated nicely with the IOD transfer. I pushed some recycled styrofoam into the small hole and added the orange flower and a few leaves. Then I hot glued some moss over any bare spots of styrofoam. To add another 3D element, I pushed a couple twigs into the nest and wrapped some pip berries around them. I know some viewers don't like bows, but I think they're cute, so I hot glued a small one on the lid. And finally, I added a sawtooth hanger to the back so I can hang it on the wall. When I thrifted this wood rabbit, Easter was months away, but for 25 cents, I couldn't pass it up. I don't want to use it as hanging decor, so I removed the wire and filled the holes. I used quick wood instead of regular wood filler because it stays in the hole better and dries faster. Once it was dry, I sanded the rabbit smooth and gave it a fresh coat of white paint on both sides. I wanted to decoupage it with a William Morris patterned paper napkin that I bought at Home Goods. I pulled off the back 2 plies, leaving just the top pattern ply. Then I brushed a light even coat of Mod Podge over one side of the rabbit and carefully placed the napkin on top. I smoothed it out with my hands and then rolled over it with a brayer. And that's when I noticed there was a hole. I thought about trying to repair it with another piece of napkin, but I decided to pull it off and start over with a new napkin. However, as I removed some of the napkin, I decided I liked the look of the torn piece that just covered part of the rabbit. So I smoothed over it and brushed on a top coat of Mod Podge to seal it in place. Then I tried to replicate that process on the back of the rabbit. It worked, but I liked the way the front piece tore more than the back piece. Once the top coat of Mod Podge was dry, I distressed the edges of the rabbit with sandpaper. I wanted to add a quote or poem to the rabbit, but I've used up most of my typography rub-on transfers. So I found a piece of gift wrap that had quotes about nature. I tore out one of the quotes and decoupaged it to the rabbit, giving it a top coat of Mod Podge too. Then I added a bow and a few pink flowers. I bought this stand with a fake cardboard stone at Dollar Tree quite a while ago, and I'm finally going to use it. I painted the stand with light green chalk paint to coordinate better with the decoupaged rabbit. Then, to attach the rabbit to the stand, I used a combination of wood glue and hot glue and clamped it until the wood glue had dried. I ended up giving the stand a second coat of green chalk paint to get full coverage, and when the second coat had dried, I brushed on white wax to seal it, just lightly dabbing off the excess. I've probably thrifted more picture frames than I can use in this lifetime. I'd say these little pictures are from the 1970s and the prints are very faded, so I'm going to replace them. I removed the sawtooth hangers because I'm going to use the frames horizontally, and I'll replace the hangers when I'm done. When I removed the print, I also removed the glass because I won't be able to use it with the idea I have in mind. I printed out 2 images of swallows flying and used the cleanup function on my iPhone to remove the stems from their mouths. You'll see why in just a minute. I used spray adhesive to adhere the printed images to the cardboard backing from each frame. Since I'm not using the glass, I needed to cut an additional backing piece to assure a good fit in the frame. I used foam board, but cardboard would have worked too. After fitting everything back into the frame, I cut a piece of scrapbook paper to fit over the back of the frame, and again used spray adhesive to adhere it to the frame. You could use brown craft paper, but I have a bunch of scrapbook paper left over that I'm trying to use up. I reattached the sawtooth hangers, and then to make the bird prints look like paintings and to protect the paper, I brushed a light coat of Mod Podge over the bird pictures. If you're wondering why I didn't just put the glass back in the frames, it's because I want to glue either end of a strand of string to the bird's beaks. I used clear Gorilla Glue rather than hot glue because I didn't want to see a glob of glue under the string.
My husband and I love fresh baked bread and pastries. Who doesn't? But honestly, I don't like to take the time or create the mess to make them myself. So I was excited when Wild Grain reached out to see if I'd like to try their products. If you've never heard of Wild Grain, it is the first bake from frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, artisanal pastries, and fresh pasta. The thing that makes Wild Grain unique is that they partner with small bakers and pasta makers from across the country. So your products are freshly frozen and delivered right to your door, ready to go in the freezer or to eat in 25 minutes or less. I made a beautiful sourdough the day the box arrived, and my husband and I ate it in less than a day. Needless to say, it was delicious. And today I am baking the croissants, which I am planning on taking over to our brand new next door neighbors. But I may have to keep one for myself because croissants are my absolute favorite. Do these not look absolutely delicious? If you want to check out wild grain for yourself, right now is a great time because if you use the link in my description box and the code Canterbury Cottage, you will get $30 off your first box and free croissants for life. Okay, the free croissants could be a little dangerous, but you can always give them to your neighbors.
Here's another picture frame project. This pretty oval frame was sold by itself without glass or backing. Although I'm not a fan of painting things white anymore, I really thought that white was the best color for this idea. I gave it 2 coats of chalk paint, and when the paint was dry, I lightly distressed it with sandpaper and then brushed on a coat of clear wax to seal the paint. I measured the opening in the frame and printed out a botanical image of a nettle-leaved bellflower on a full sheet of cardstock. This next step is probably going to surprise you, but I adhered the print over the cardboard faux stone from the Dollar Tree stand. It wasn't a perfect fit for the frame, but I didn't care. First, I used scissors to cut off the excess paper, and then I used an X-Acto knife to cut precisely along the edges of the cardboard. And finally, I lightly sanded over the cut edges to create a natural-looking edge. I inserted the cardboard into the frame, and to hold it in place, I just hot glued around the edges. Before proceeding, I wanted to clean up the back of the frame. I first removed the D-ring, and then I cut out a piece of scrapbook paper to fit the back of the frame and attached it with spray adhesive. Rather than reattaching the D-ring, I used a sawtooth hanger instead because a sawtooth hanger allows you to adjust the nail placement if one side of the picture frame is heavier than the other, which might happen with this picture. Next, I pulled some bellflowers from a previously thrifted vase of flowers. That's why I specifically printed a picture of bellflowers. I was planning on attaching these flowers to the frame, but due to the irregular shape of the Dollar Tree cardboard, there were a few small gaps near the top where the cardboard did not meet the frame. So instead, I stuck the flower stems through those gaps. The stems were now sandwiched between the art print and the scrapbook paper on the back of the frame. So hopefully it looks like the flowers are growing out of the picture. If you watched last week's video, you may remember seeing this red lantern, and today I'm finally going to use it. I cut a scrap piece of styrofoam in half and hot glued each half to the bottom of the lantern. I previously cut all the pink flowers off of this viney faux branch to use on a birdhouse. And yes, I saved the stems. And now I'm going to hot glue some small leaves cut from a piece of greenery to the spots where the flowers had been attached. Then I stuck the vine into the styrofoam inside the lantern to provide some height. Some time ago, I bought a spray of foam mushrooms at Dollar General for $1, but I thought they looked really fake, so I hadn't used them. So to give them a more natural look, I used an X-Acto knife to cut off the mushroom stems and slightly dig out a hole. Then I used a dollop of hot glue in the hole to attach a small stick. For a more whimsical look, I painted the mushroom caps with red chalk paint. Once the paint was dry, I dipped the handle end of a small paintbrush into white chalk paint to create polka dots on the mushroom caps. For the underside of the caps, I cut a piece of brown moss into small strips and hot glued the pieces in a circle around the top of the stem. I added 3 mushrooms to the styrofoam because groupings of 3 are pleasing to the eye. I made a hole with a paintbrush handle, filled the hole with hot glue, and then pushed in the mushroom sticks. I added a strange piece of green dried mushroom that came in a variety bag of moss. Then I tore some moss into smaller pieces and hot glued those pieces over the styrofoam. This framed botanical print is another leftover thrifted find. It's cute, but I just don't have a spot for it in my home. So I'm taking the print out of the frame and using it on the back of this lantern. After I trimmed the sides a bit, it easily slid under the metal sides of the lantern. I wanted to dress up the back of the lantern, but also keep it easy to remove the botanical print. So I hot glued some ribbon along the metal sides. The ribbon can be pulled off and the print removed to change it up. Even though the proportions are off, I decided to hot glue a miniature rabbit next to the mushrooms. I also trimmed the extra transparency from the edges of a Dollar Tree butterfly sticker and hot glued that to one of the mushrooms. Okay, I can't waste the frame that held that botanical print. So I printed out a vintage duck print that's in the public domain. I use the Print to Size app to adjust the size of the image and send it to my printer. You can tell by the tabs on the back that this is a newer frame. I moved the sawtooth hanger so the frame would hang horizontally. The paint was a little scratched up, so I decided to give it a fresh coat of paint, just using some black latex paint that I had on hand. Once the paint was dry, I wanted to try to attach this duck spinner to the frame. This is an old thrift store find that I believe is used to decorate a planter. I snipped off the wire stem. Then I marked the area on the frame where I wanted to place the duck. I applied some clear Gorilla Glue gel and hot glue within that area and pressed the duck into the glue. Vintage sugar bowls make great containers for so many things. Today, I'm going to use it to store matches, partly because I have a bunch of matches left over from a previous DIY. To make it functional, you need to attach a striker. You could cut one off of a matchbox, but I have a sheet of adhesive striker paper. I thought about attaching the paper to the bottom of the bowl, but decided it would be more convenient to put it in the lid. I pressed the paper into the lid to create crease lines so I could cut out a circle that would fit nicely in the lid. Once cut out, I peeled off the backing and pressed it into place. In last week's video, I used the glass cloche and base from this anniversary clock. So this week, I wanted to use the leftover clock mechanism. I removed all the decorative pieces that I could, and then I used an angle grinder to cut off the extra bits of plastic on the clock's underside. I wanted the bottom of the clock to be flat so that it would sit level and upright. Rather than permanently attaching the clock to something like I usually do, this time I'm just going to place it in a thrift store candle lantern. To add some texture and height inside the lantern, I rolled up 3 sheets of paper torn from an old school workbook. I thrifted this workbook because it has several blank pages that I can use in my printer when I want to create a truly vintage looking image. I tied the rolls together with some lace ribbon and propped them behind the clock. Then I added some dried baby's breath left over from an old bouquet of flowers. I wanted to add a little owl to the top of the clock, but to be seen over the clock face, I needed to first glue a piece of wood to the clock. Then I could glue the owl to the wood. Thanks so much for watching. And if you liked today's video, here's a similar video from last spring that I think you'll really enjoy.